The rain clung to her coat like a hand that didn't want her to leave. Elena stood at the edge of the bus platform, one duffel bag at her feet, her mother's worn sheet music pressed against her chest as if it were the only thing still choosing her. The November wind sliced through the empty lot, carrying the faint smell of exhaust and something lonelier, like the echo of a life she'd stayed in too long. She didn't cry. She'd learned not to, but her fingers trembled as she loosened the house key from her ring. For years she'd waited for that house to feel like home again. It never had. The key slipped from her hand, clinking against the pavement before disappearing into the storm drain below. A quiet act, a small sound, but it felt like stepping off the edge of an old life and hoping the fall would lead somewhere softer, somewhere in the distance. A bus engine rumbled awake, and for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she was running away or finally running towards something. If you've ever stood at a crossroads with nothing but hope and a trembling heart, this story may feel achingly familiar. Let's begin. The November rain struck the porch roof in wild, uneven bursts, as if it were urging Elena Foster to leave before she changed her mind. She stood at the threshold of the house that had once been her entire world, her fingers numb around the handle of a worn duffel bag. The porch light behind her flickered, casting a pale glow on the wooden boards that creaked softly beneath her shoes. Every inch of this place held a memory she wished she could still love. Don't you walk out that door. Elena. Donna's voice sliced through the dim hallway behind her. Sharp. Certain. The same tone that had dictated Elena's life for years. Elena didn't turn around. She knew exactly what she'd see. Donna's thinning blonde hair pulled too tightly back, her jaw set in that familiar look of irritated entitlement, her arms crossed as though discipline alone kept the house standing. Elena had spent too many nights feeling 20 years younger than her age under that gaze. You owe me more than this, Donna snapped. Your father would have wanted you to help me, after everything I've done for you. A flash of wet wind cut across the porch and lifted the ends of Elena's coat. She felt the cold seep into her bones, but it steadied her. The truth was simple. Donna hadn't done anything for her unless one counted the years of belittling remarks, accusations of ingratitude, and daily reminders that Elena should be grateful for every crumb of tolerance offered. I can't stay here anymore, Elena said quietly. She heard her own voice tremble and hated that it did. She stepped farther onto the porch, the rain hitting her hair, dampening her collar. Behind her, Donna's heels clicked sharply on the hardwood. You're being dramatic, Donna scoffed. Where will you even go? You don't have a job. You don't have family ready to take you in. If you think I'm sending you money, I'm not asking for anything. Her throat tightened. She swallowed the pressure behind her eyes, refusing to let tears mix with the rain. In her hand was a manila folder, her mother's handwritten piano scores. The last pieces of gentleness she had in the world. Everything else was in the duffel, a few clothes, a toothbrush, a wallet with under $200. That cousin in Dayton is expecting your call, Donna continued. If you won't stay here out of respect, then at least go where you're supposed to. I've already told her you might arrive next week. Elena exhaled, a slow, tired breath. I'm 38 years old. I'm not a package to be forwarded to someone else. Donna stepped onto the porch, her voice dropping to a hiss. Then you're choosing homelessness, and don't think you can come back when reality hits. Lightning split the sky. The thunder rolled in so close it made the porch boards tremble. Elena tightened her grip on the folder. Goodbye, Donna. And she walked down the steps into the rain. Her shoes soaked through almost instantly. Cold water ran past the curb, carrying dead leaves toward the storm drain. She moved carefully down the sidewalk, each step both liberating and terrifying. She had no umbrella, no plan, only a fragile piece of herself she refused to let die. The bus station was 3 blocks away. She knew because she'd looked it up weeks earlier on an old laptop Donna didn't know she still used. The idea of leaving had hovered in her mind for years, faint as a whisper. Tonight it had finally become louder than fear. By the time she reached the Greyhound station, her coat clung to her like wet cardboard. Inside, The air smelled of coffee, old vinyl, and impatience. People stood in loose lines, some carrying luggage, others only backpacks. No one paid her any attention. That anonymity felt like a small blessing. She bought a one-way ticket to Boston, the only city that had ever represented possibility for her. When she was 12, her father had taken her there to visit a conservatory. She remembered the wide steps, the ringing laughter of students carrying violin cases, the way her father had smiled and squeezed her hand. "You belong in a place like this someday," he'd told her. Someday had slipped away somewhere between bills, responsibility, and Donna's steady erosion of confidence. The next bus was leaving in minutes. Elena boarded with her shoulders shivering and her heart heavy. She found a window seat midway back and set her folder on her lap, as gently as if it were made of glass. Outside, rain blurred the world into shifting streaks of silver. As the bus pulled away, the station lights receded, replaced by long stretches of highway. The hum of the engine became a strange comfort. Elena rested her forehead against the cool glass and tried to imagine Boston's narrow streets, its old brick buildings, the harbor wind. She had no place to stay, no job, no certainty. She only knew she couldn't breathe under Donna's roof anymore. Hours passed. The bus was dim, filled mostly with people sleeping or scrolling through their phones. Elena's legs ached, her back stiffened. Every now and then, the driver turned slightly and her bag shifted at her feet, somewhere near Cleveland. Dawn tried to break through the thick clouds but failed. The sky remained a dull slate gray. When the bus pulled into a rest stop near Toledo, Elena stepped down, stretching her stiff legs. The pavement glistened with rain, and the cold felt sharp enough to cut. She stood near a storm drain, absently rubbing her thumb across the edge of the house key still in her pocket. Her stomach twisted. That key had once opened the door to her childhood room. Eventually, it had opened the same door after her father died, only every inch of that room had been slowly taken over by Donna's things. Her mother's quilt folded into a storage box, her father's books given away, her childhood piano sheet music nearly thrown out until Elena rescued it. She held the key above the drain, her hand trembling. Walking away wasn't enough. She needed something final. A gust of wind pushed her hair across her face, and the rain started again, not heavy, but steady enough to blur her vision. She let the key drop. It hit the metal grate with a thin clang, then slid out of sight. Her breath left her in a single shudder. It was done. She boarded the bus again, her clothes damp, her heart hollow and oddly light at the same time. As the engine rumbled to life and the road stretched ahead, she pressed the folder of sheet music to her chest. She had no idea what waited in that distant city. She only knew she was headed towards something different, something she might finally choose for herself. And as the bus rolled east, the question she'd tried to ignore settled quietly inside her. What would she find in a city where she knew no one? She didn't see the car, only the sudden wash of white light sliding across the wet pavement like a warning too late to heed. Elena froze mid-step, her breath catching in her throat as the world seemed to tilt. The smell of exhaust and cold rain rushed over her, and somewhere close, brakes shrieked against asphalt. For a moment, she simply stood there, soaked to the skin and unable to move. 20 hours on a bus had hollowed her out. Her legs felt borrowed, her stomach cramped from hunger, and Boston's November rain felt colder than anything she'd known in Ohio. She'd stepped off the morning arrival thinking adrenaline alone would carry her, but now, as the headlights blazed inches from her knees, she felt the limit of her body press in from every direction. A car door slammed, footsteps splashed toward her. "Are you hurt?" The voice was deep, precise, carrying the kind of controlled urgency that belonged to someone used to taking command. Elena blinked against the rain. The lights behind the man created a faint halo at his shoulders, and when he stepped close enough for her eyes to focus, she saw a tall, broad-shouldered figure in a charcoal overcoat, already darkened with water. I'm fine," she managed, but her voice wavered, thin and uncertain. He stopped in front of her, breath visible in pale clouds. His gaze ran over her quickly, as though checking for injuries, but not in a way that felt invasive, more like someone trying to assess a problem he had accidentally created. "You didn't see me?" he said, not accusingly but with disbelief in himself. "The street is slick. I braked too late." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry." She shook her head, though the motion made her vision tilt. "It was my fault. I shouldn't have stepped out." Her duffel slipped off her shoulder and hit the pavement with a dull, wet thud. At the same moment, the folder of sheet music she had tucked under her arm slid free, scattering the worn pages across the road like pale leaves. The ink blurred as soon as the rain touched it. "No, please." Her breath broke as she knelt, trying to gather them before the water ruined what little she had left. The man dropped to one knee beside her, not hesitating about soaking the knees of his tailored trousers. He reached for the nearest page, lifting it delicately by the corner. Even in the dim streetlight, she saw the paper droop from how wet it had become. "These yours?" he asked quietly. She nodded, swallowing the rising panic in her throat. "They're all I have from my mother." His expression shifted something subtle but unmistakably human, a softening beneath the practiced control. He collected another page, then another, moving with care despite the rain pouring down his coat in rivulets. When he stood, he offered the small stack back to her. "I'm sorry they got wet." The apology was simple, genuine. Elena tried to take them, but her fingers trembled too much to grip properly. Her body shivered in a violent wave that cracked through her composure. "You're freezing," he said. "How long have you been walking?" She tried to answer but couldn't form the words. She didn't want to admit she had nowhere to go. She didn't want to appear like a woman who needed help from a stranger. Not tonight, not when she'd promised herself she would start a new life without leaning on anyone. He studied her face for a beat, concern tightening the lines around his eyes. "I'm calling someone," he said, reaching for his phone. "No, no, please don't." She stepped back, her shoes slipping slightly. "I'm just tired. I just need." Her breath hitched. She didn't even know what she needed. Shelter, food, heat, anything to stop the shaking. He pocketed the phone again and spoke slowly, as though adjusting to her fear. "All right, no ambulance. But you're not well. You almost collapsed in front of my car." "I didn't," she whispered, though her knees trembled hard enough to betray her. He extended a steadying hand, but didn't touch her. The offer alone felt like an unexpected kindness. She stared at it, the raindrops sliding from his cuff, the quiet patience in the way he held himself, unfamiliar. Patience, she thought, as if he wasn't used to waiting on anyone. Yet here he was, letting her decide. She reached for her bag, but as she bent, the world softened again at the edges. The buildings across the street wavered, their lights bending. She felt her breath shorten, then disappear. Her leg buckled. The man stepped forward quickly, his hand catching her arm before she hit the ground. His grip was firm but gentle, steadying her against him. "Easy," he murmured. "Just stand still a moment." She leaned against his support without meaning to, ashamed of how her body betrayed her. Heat surged under her skin. Embarrassment. Not warmth. "I'm okay," she insisted, though her voice sounded small even to her own ears. "No, you're not. And that's all right." He held her just enough to keep her upright, not enough to overwhelm. "Let's get you somewhere dry. Will you let me do that much?" Her pulse thudded heavily, each beat echoing the fear of trusting the wrong person. But his tone carried no pressure, no hint of advantage, only concern, steady and almost strangely reluctant, as if he didn't want to frighten her further. "You don't know me," she whispered. "True." His eyes held hers with quiet steadiness. "But I almost hit you. That makes you my responsibility until you're safe." She swallowed hard. Exhaustion swarmed her senses. The cold burrowed deeper into her bones. She doubted she could take 5 steps without falling again. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena?" "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Grayson." The name sounded familiar, maybe from something she'd overheard on the bus, or from one of the ads she'd glimpsed in the station, but her mind was too clouded to place it. He adjusted his grip, letting her lean just enough to stay upright. There's a cafe open half a block from here. It's warm, bright, public. He paused, giving her a chance to object. We'll go there first. Rain continued to fall around them in thin silver lines. Elena felt each drop like a ticking clock against her skin. She had left Ohio craving independence, determined never to rely on anyone again. Yet, here she was, half collapsed in the arms of a stranger whose headlights she hadn't even seen. "Okay," she whispered. His shoulders eased a fraction, barely noticeable. "All right, let's take it slow." They began moving toward the corner, his steps measured, hers unsteady. She kept her gaze on the pavement, watching the reflections of street lamps stretch and bend with each step. She didn't know who he truly was, didn't know why he seemed so intent on making sure she didn't fall. But as the cafe lights came into view through the mist, a question pulsed through the fog of exhaustion, soft yet insistent. Why did this stranger care so intensely whether she was okay? The elevator doors opened to a silence so deep it felt like stepping into someone's unsaid grief. Elena paused at the threshold, unsure if the hush came from the penthouse itself or from the exhaustion ringing in her ears. Either way, the quiet wrapped around her like a held breath. Daniel stepped inside first, switching on a single lamp near the entryway. A warm pool of amber light spread across polished hardwood floors, revealing a living room more expansive than any home she had ever stepped into. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the faint glow of Back Bay, the city lights blurred slightly by the mist still clinging to the glass. "Come in," he said gently. Elena wiped one boot against the mat, then hesitated before stepping onto the pristine rug. Her shoes were still damp. Everything in the apartment looked untouched, perfectly arranged, perfectly clean. The kind of place where even a misplaced book might feel like an intrusion. "You can leave your bag by the bench," he added when she hovered uncertainly. "There are towels in the hall closet. I'll get them." She nodded, clutching the strap of her duffel as though it might anchor her. The space around her felt beautiful, but hollow, like a showroom wearing the shape of someone's life, rather than a life actually lived. No framed photos on the shelves. No scattered mugs or jackets draped over chairs. Just immaculate lines and muted colors. When Daniel returned with the towels, she took them with both hands, grateful for their warmth. "Thank you. I'm sorry for..." She gestured vaguely at the puddles beneath her feet. "All of this. You don't need to apologize." His expression softened. "You were walking alone in freezing rain after a 20-hour ride. Anyone would be worn thin." But she heard Donna's voice anyway. "You're a burden, Elena. Everything about you weighs on someone." She forced a thin smile. "I just don't want to impose. You're not..." He paused, as though weighing the next words, at least not in any way that matters. She wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his tone made her chest tighten. He motioned down the hallway. The guest room is the first door on the right. Showers through there as well. "Take your time. I'll heat something up for you. You don't have to, I know." He gave a faint, tired smile. "But I'd like to..." She glanced again at the pristine rug, feeling small and out of place. "Okay. Thank you." When he disappeared into the kitchen, she carried her bag toward the guest room. Her shoes squeaked softly on the floor, each sound a sharp reminder of how foreign this place was. The guest room held a neatly made bed, a folded blanket at the foot, and a soft yellow lamp on the nightstand. It was warm, simple, almost gentle, an unexpected contrast to the sleek coldness of the living room. In the bathroom, the warm water felt like forgiveness. She let it run over her chilled scalp, her stiff shoulders, the ache deep in her legs. But the relief brought a sudden sting to her eyes. She braced a hand on the shower wall, steadying her breath, trying not to imagine Donna's smirk if she knew Elena was sheltering in a stranger's penthouse. "You won't survive out there. No one wants someone like you." Elena pressed her forehead to the tile. She didn't want to be someone rescued. She wanted to stand on her own feet. But tonight, her feet had almost given out under a pair of headlights. When she emerged wrapped in the towel, she found a set of dry clothes folded on the bed, soft gray sweatpants and a navy t-shirt. They were clearly Daniel's clean, neatly folded, smelling faintly of cedar and laundry soap. She hesitated before putting them on, but the warmth was irresistible. Back in the hallway, she followed the faint clinking sound to the kitchen. Daniel stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to his forearms, stirring something in a small pot. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of tomato and basil. "You didn't need to cook," she said softly. "It's just soup," he replied. "Sit. You should eat." A marble counter separated the kitchen from the living room. Elena lowered herself onto a stool, pulling the sleeves over her hands. She watched Daniel from the corner of her eye. In the lamplight, his face looked more tired than she'd first noticed. Something guarded sat behind his composure, like a man who carried more than he ever admitted. He set a bowl in front of her. "Careful. It's hot." The warmth rose to her face, easing a tightness in her stomach she hadn't realized was hunger. She took the first spoonful slowly. It tasted like comfort, simple, steady, grounding. "This place is beautiful," she said between breaths. "You must love the view." He leaned against the counter across from her, arms crossed loosely. "I used to... lately, it's just... familiar." She sensed the emptiness beneath the word, but didn't pry. Her gaze drifted toward the far corner of the room. That's when she saw it, a grand piano, black and immaculate, sitting under a framed photograph of a concert hall. The lid was closed, the bench pushed in precisely. She set down her spoon. "You play." Daniel's eyes shifted not to the piano, but away from it, as though the sight of it tugged at something he didn't want to unpack. "I used to," he said after a moment. The quiet stretched between them, fragile as thin ice. Elena watched him, sensing the shift in his posture, the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly. Some memory lived there in that pause, something tender or painful or both. But she didn't dare ask. "May I?" She lifted her hand slightly toward the instrument, not rising from her seat but drawn to it. His gaze flicked to her hand, then to the piano, then back to her. "If you want to look at it, you can..." So she rose, taking the bowl with her to keep her hands from trembling too visibly. Each step toward the piano felt heavier, like wading into a story she didn't yet understand. She reached out, letting her fingertips brush the smooth lid. The surface was cold beneath her skin. Her hand trembled. She wasn't sure if it was from the lingering chill in her body or from something deeper memories of sitting beside her mother at a worn upright piano. The faint scent of old sheet music. The way music had once been the one place she felt sure of herself. She drew a breath, but before she could lift the lid, she heard Daniel behind her. The sound of his breath caught faintly, almost imperceptibly. She turned, the question rising before she could stop it. "Why did you look away earlier when I mentioned it?" The words hung in the quiet penthouse, suspended like a note waiting for resolution. She saw his shoulders tense, just slightly. His gaze dipped toward the floor, then shifted to the windows instead of her face. And in the space before he answered, Elena felt the edges of something complicated, something he wasn't ready to name yet. He spoke without looking at her, as if the only way to tell the truth was to tell it to the floor. Daniel stood a few feet from the piano, his hand resting on the edge of the closed lid, fingers curled as though unsure whether to hold on or let go. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "She loved this piano, played it almost every day until she couldn't anymore." Elena waited, unsure whether to step closer or give him distance. The rain outside tapped softly against the windows, a faint rhythm in the large, silent room. "She passed 8 years ago," he continued. "Cancer." His voice stayed even, but she noticed the way his shoulders tightened beneath the fabric of his shirt. "I used to play, but after she died, it felt wrong. I thought maybe, with time, it would get easier, but then the divorce happened, and the piano just..." He gestured vaguely. "It's been sitting here ever since." Elena felt a pull in her chest, the kind that came when someone else's grief nudged her own. She understood the silence that followed, lost the way it seeped into corners, into habits, into the spaces left behind. "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Daniel gave a small nod without looking up. He moved toward the kitchen as if needing the distance, and she followed slowly, holding her hands together to keep from fidgeting. The kitchen light cast a warm glow across the island, where the two bowls sat empty. The steam long faded. He sat first. She took the seat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain grew heavier, streaking down the tall glass panes like someone drawing lines through the city's reflection. He cleared his throat. "You mentioned earlier that things weren't good where you were coming from." Elena's breath caught. She hadn't meant to slip even that much. Old instinct told her to smile and say it was fine, that she was fine, that nothing had ever been wrong. But sitting here, across from a man who had just revealed a piece of his own unfinished story, pretending seemed impossible. "My stepmother's name is Donna," she began. "She moved in after my father remarried, and she—" Elena tried to choose the right words, but the right words felt heavy, like pulling up something buried deep. She had a way of picking apart everything I did, everything I was, not yelling, just cutting, every day. Daniel listened without interrupting. She couldn't see his thoughts, but she saw the way his hands curled loosely around the edge of the counter, the way he leaned forward slightly, as though bracing for the next part. For years. Elena continued. It was little things, comments about how I wasn't trying hard enough, or that my father spoiled me. But after he died, it got worse. I think she expected me to disappear so she could have the house to herself. She exhaled shakily. When she said she'd send me to live with a distant cousin, that was it. I realized I had to leave. Rain drummed softly against the windows, echoing the ache in her voice. "I'm sorry," Daniel said quietly. Elena looked down at her hands. "It sounds ridiculous, being this age and still letting someone make you feel small." "It isn't ridiculous," he replied. She couldn't read his expression, but something in his voice steadied her. "Being trapped in a situation that wears you down isn't weakness. It's human." She swallowed, her chest tightening. For so long, I thought everything she said was true, that I had nothing to offer, that I'd waited too long to start over. He didn't rush to reassure her. He simply let the silence sit between them, warm and unhurried, like a place where truth could finally breathe. Her gaze drifted again toward the piano. The lid caught the faint reflection of the city lights, making the black surface look like a night sky after rain. Without realizing it, she stood and walked toward it. Daniel didn't stop her. She sensed he wouldn't. She rested her hand on the lid, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingers. Her mother's face flickered in her memory, soft eyes, tired hands, the gentle sway of her shoulders as she hummed while practicing. Elena hesitated, then slowly lifted the lid just enough to press a single key. The note floated out fragile, hesitant, like a breath held too long. She heard Daniel shift behind her. Her mother's handwriting flashed in her mind, curved lines, pencil marks, little reminders to play lightly here or slow down and breathe. Elena pressed another key, then another, forming the beginning measure of a simple composition her mother used to play on Sunday mornings. The sound was thin at first, then fuller as it found space in the quiet apartment. She felt her throat tighten. When she glanced over her shoulder, Daniel had turned his face away. His hand rested against his temple, his jaw clenched, his breath uneven. She couldn't see his eyes, but she saw the way he angled his body slightly, as though the music touched a place he didn't open willingly. She lifted her fingers from the keys, letting the last note fade into the room. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. It's okay." His voice was rougher than before, low and strained. "It's just been a long time." She closed the lid softly. For a moment, they stood in the quiet, two strangers in a high-rise apartment, surrounded by rain and memories neither had planned to share that night. "Elena," he said, still not fully looking at her, "there's a lot about my life I haven't figured out how to talk about. And hearing music again, it brings things back in ways I'm not ready for. She nodded, her chest tender with understanding she couldn't fully express. Outside, the rain streaked harder across the glass, drawing blurred trails down the city lights. Inside, Elena stood beside the piano, unsure if she'd crossed a line or opened a door she didn't yet understand. And in the space between them, one question hovered like a quiet ache. Why did music still hurt him so much? By the third morning, the house felt different, not warmer, but less empty. Elena noticed it the moment she stepped into the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The faint smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, and the soft whistle of the machine cooling down echoed through the quiet penthouse. Daniel was already at the counter, sleeves rolled up, reading glasses low on his nose as he scanned something on a tablet. He looked more relaxed than she'd seen him since the night they met. Not quite comfortable, but not tightly wound either. "Morning," he said, glancing up. His voice was steady, casual, as if they'd been greeting each other this way for years. "Good morning," Elena replied, warming her hands around the mug he slid toward her. The steam curled upward, catching the soft gold of the sunrise filling the room. Boston glowed in muted shades beyond the tall windows' pinks, oranges, quiet blues. She took a sip, breathing in the rhythm of a morning that didn't feel borrowed. "Are you heading into the office today?" she asked. "Later," he said. "I've got a few things to sort through first." "Actually," he set down the tablet, looking at her with a mixture of caution and intention. "I wanted to ask you something." Elena's pulse tightened. Part of her still braced for criticism, for demands, for disappointment. Donna had carved that reflex deep. "I need help organizing my home office," he said. "It's a mess, and I've been avoiding it. You're welcome to stay here until you figure out next steps. But if you'd like something to do, I could pay you for the hours." Her shoulders eased, though the inside of her chest fluttered with a conflict she didn't quite know how to name. "You don't have to pay me," she murmured. "I do," he answered simply. "I want this to be an arrangement that has dignity for you, not charity." The words landed softly but firmly, steadying her in a way she hadn't expected. "All right," she said. "I'd like that." He nodded once, almost relieved. That day unfolded differently. Elena followed him into his office, an impressive space filled with bookshelves, boxes of files, stacks of unopened mail, and half-finished projects. She rolled up her sleeves and began sorting, labeling, stacking. Daniel drifted in and out, sometimes sitting nearby to answer questions, sometimes disappearing to make calls. By noon, they had settled into an easy rhythm, her organizing, him focusing, the quiet comfort of shared space filling the air without either of them naming it. Later, over a simple lunch of soup and toasted bread, their conversation moved past the edges of politeness. Daniel told her about growing up in Maine, about his father's strictness and his mother's softness, how the two had shaped him more than he cared to admit. Elena shared memories of high school music recitals, of the one summer she spent in Chicago with her aunt, where she almost auditioned for a conservatory but lost her nerve. "Do you regret not trying?" Daniel asked. "Every day," she said honestly, surprising herself. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered something gentler. "It's not too late." The words lingered even after he left for a meeting that afternoon. The penthouse was quiet again, but it no longer felt like a museum. Elena wandered toward the piano, hesitating only a moment before lifting the lid. Her fingertips hovered above the keys, a familiar ache tugging inside her, as if music lived beneath her skin. Waiting. She played softly at first, then with more confidence as old muscle memory returned. Something fragile and honest filled the room, each note a reminder of the girl she used to be before Donna's voice grew louder than her own. She didn't hear footsteps until she reached the end of a short passage. A faint shift in the air made her glance back. Daniel stood in the hallway, one hand braced against the wall, his posture frozen, not startled, but overwhelmed. He wasn't trying to hide it. His chest rose unevenly, his face shadowed with something she couldn't decipher. She straightened instinctively. "I'm sorry, I didn't think you'd be back so soon. I didn't mean to." "No." His voice came out low, rough. "Don't apologize. It's just unexpected." He stepped closer, but not too close. His gaze held the piano, not her. "I haven't heard that room sound like itself in years," he said. Elena's heart beat a little faster. "I can stop if it's too much." "It's not?" He exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "It's something I didn't realize I missed." For a moment, neither moved. The late afternoon sun washed the room in a muted glow, soft gold settling on Daniel's shirt, on the piano's polished surface, on the sheet music she had laid beside her. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had prepared for. She closed the lid gently. "I'll keep working on the office," she said, trying to anchor herself. He nodded, though his eyes lingered on her longer than before. That night, as she lay in the guest room, Elena stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city below. Safety, real safety, felt dangerous in its own way. She feared leaning into it, afraid it might vanish the moment she began to trust it. But beneath that fear was something warmer, a small, careful comfort, a softness she hadn't felt in years. She rolled onto her side, pulling the blanket close. Somewhere in the penthouse, a floorboard creaked, a quiet reminder she wasn't alone. And she wondered, with a mix of hope and unease, was this comfort becoming something she shouldn't let herself want? The doorbell rang with a confidence only someone unwelcome would have. Elena froze in the doorway of the kitchen, her hand still hovering over the dish towel she had been folding. Daniel stood a few feet away, turning toward the sound with a sharpness she hadn't seen in him before, alert, bracing. "I wasn't expecting anyone," he said quietly. Before she could respond, he crossed the room and opened the front door. A woman swept in on a swirl of cold air and October drizzle. She was striking tall, sharply dressed, her blonde hair pinned with meticulous precision. Water dripped from the edge of her black umbrella onto the polished hardwood floor, each drop landing with an authority that matched her posture. "Hello, Daniel," she said, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. His jaw tightened. "Lauren. What are you doing here, Lauren Whitmore?" The name he'd mentioned only once, with the same guarded tone he used when talking about the piano. "I was in the area," she said lightly, stepping further inside without waiting for permission. "And I thought we could catch up. We haven't spoken in months." Daniel closed the door behind her, exhaling slowly. Elena felt suddenly out of place, standing barefoot in borrowed clothes at the edge of a life she barely understood. Lauren's gaze slid toward her, assessing, slow, razor sharp. "And who is this?" she asked, her tone deceptively smooth. "This is Elena," Daniel said. "She's helping me with some work around the apartment." Lauren's brows lifted in a polite, surgical arch. "I see." She extended a hand toward Elena, her smile both warm and cold at once. "Lovely to meet you." Elena shook her hand, feeling the chill of rain still clinging to Lauren's fingers. "You too," she murmured, though her stomach tightened. Lauren didn't release her hand immediately. She held it just long enough for the gesture to feel like a claim. Then she let go, her eyes flicking back to Daniel. "You didn't tell me you had company," she said. "I didn't think I needed to," he replied. Something unspoken passed between them, something old and complicated, thickening the air. Lauren set her umbrella against the wall, droplets of water forming a small, gleaming pool on the floor. The sight made Elena's breath catch. She had grown used to the quiet order of this place. Lauren's presence felt like a storm tracking mud through it. "Well," Lauren said, brushing moisture from her coat, "I'm sure you won't mind if I stay for a bit." Daniel hesitated. "I have work to finish." "Oh, I won't keep you," Lauren replied, sliding gracefully into the living room as though she still lived here. "I just wanted a moment." Elena moved toward the kitchen to give them space, but Lauren's voice followed her. "So, Elena," she said, emphasizing the name as though tasting it. "How long have you been staying here?" Elena turned halfway. "A few days?" Lauren nodded, her lips curling. "And Daniel invited you?" "Yes." "Generous of him," she murmured, glancing at Daniel before returning her gaze to Elena. He's always been generous with projects. Daniel stepped forward. Lauren, that's enough. Is it? She asked, examining her nails. I'm simply making conversation. But the comment landed like a stone. Elena felt heat rise to her face. I'm not a project, she said quietly. Lauren gave a soft, airy laugh. Oh dear, they all say that at first. Daniel's eyes darkened. Lauren. She waved a dismissive hand. Relax, Daniel. I'm not here to fight. Her gaze slid back to Elena. I'm here because I know how he is. He finds someone who needs help. He steps in. He feels needed. And then, she tilted her head. Life gets busy. He moves on, and the woman he was saving is left wondering what happened. That's not fair, Daniel said. Isn't it? She replied, still staring at Elena. I was married to you, Daniel. I know your patterns. Silence settled tight, uneasy. Elena crossed her arms without realizing it. Donna's voice echoed in her mind like a fault line cracking open. You think you can stand on your own? Someone like you always ends up depending on the stronger people. I'm not looking for someone to save me, she said firmly. Lauren's smile sharpened. You think that now? Daniel moved closer to Elena, his presence steady, but the tension rippled through the room like static. You should go, he told Lauren. She laughed softly, as though she had expected that. But instead of walking toward the door, she stepped toward Elena, slow, deliberate. Her perfume, cold and elegant, swept past as she leaned in close. Too close. You're just the next one, she whispered, her breath warm against Elena's ear. Wait until he finds another lost bird. Elena's heart thudded painfully. Her breath lodged in her throat. Lauren pulled back, her smile bright and polished. Well, she said lightly, picking up her umbrella. This was illuminating. Daniel opened the door without responding. He didn't touch her, didn't even look at her as she stepped into the hallway. She lingered for a beat as if savoring the impact of her visit, then disappeared into the elevator. The door clicked shut. The quiet that followed felt brittle. Daniel turned toward Elena, but she looked away. Shame, doubt, and something darker curled inside her like smoke. The warmth she'd been feeling these past few days now seemed fragile, maybe even foolish. She was wrong, Daniel said softly. Elena didn't answer. Not because she didn't believe him, but because she didn't trust herself to know the difference anymore. She stared at the small pool of rainwater Lauren had left on the floor, the droplets reflecting slants of light like broken glass. And she wondered, with a slow, sinking ache, was Lauren telling the truth or simply afraid of being replaced? She packed quietly, afraid even of her own breathing. The soft rustle of folded clothes sounded too loud in the stillness of the guest room. Dawn hadn't yet broken. The sky outside the tall windows was a heavy slate blue, the city just beginning to stir in distant murmurs. Elena moved slowly, deliberately, as if each motion might wake the house, or worse, wake her own doubts. Her duffel lay open on the bed. She placed her few belongings inside with careful hands, pausing when she reached the folder of her mother's piano scores. Her fingers trembled as she brushed the worn edges of the paper. It was the only thing in the room that felt like home. She tucked it gently into the bag. She wasn't supposed to leave like this. Not after everything Daniel had given her: warmth, space, dignity. But Lauren's words had sunk deep, finding the softest, most breakable parts of her. And it wasn't just what Lauren had said. It was what Elena had overheard afterward. Last night, after Lauren had gone, Daniel had taken a call in his office. Elena hadn't meant to linger outside the doorway. She'd gone to bring him a cup of tea, something to settle the tension that still clung to the air. But she heard a sentence that froze her where she stood. Yes, I helped her get back on her feet. No, not like before. She needed someone who could give her structure for a while. A pause, then, no. I'm not repeating old patterns. It's temporary. The conversation wasn't about her. She realized that within seconds. He'd been talking about a former employee he'd mentored after she lost her job. His tone was calm, firm, responsible, but timing was cruel. Lauren's voice echoed inside her. He collects women who need fixing. You're just the next one. Elena had backed away from the office door, her eyes burning. She wasn't angry at Daniel, not even for a moment. She was angry at herself, angry at how easily she fit into the shape Lauren had painted for her. Someone who needed saving, someone who would break at the first sign of conflict, someone who left before anyone had the chance to stay. She zipped the duffel, the sound slicing through the quiet. She froze again, listening, no footsteps, no shift of weight from down the hall. Good. She didn't want him to wake. She didn't trust her voice if he asked why she was leaving. The note lay on the nightstand, simple, painfully small. She'd rewritten it twice, then given up and left it plain. Daniel, thank you for the room, the warmth, and the kindness. You helped me more than you know. I'm grateful, truly. Elena. No explanation, no apology. Anything more would unravel her. She slipped out of the guest room, every step careful. The penthouse looked different in the thin pre-dawn light, softer, almost tender. The kitchen counters glowed faintly. The piano sat in the corner like a quiet witness, its polished surface reflecting the first hint of morning. She paused at the sight of it. A part of her wanted to cross the room, to lift the lid one last time, to press a single key, but she didn't dare. She could barely keep herself together as it was. Her coat rustled softly as she put it on. The fabric felt too thin for the Boston chill, but she didn't care. She slung the duffel over her shoulder, gripped the strap until her knuckles ached, and stepped toward the door. Her hand hesitated on the knob. In the dim hallway behind her, the closed door to Daniel's room sat quietly. No movement, no sound. She imagined him asleep, unaware, breathing evenly in the dark. For a moment, she pictured him waking later, finding the note, searching the rooms, calling her name once. Her throat tightened. This was better, she told herself. It had to be. She couldn't depend on him. She couldn't become someone waiting to be chosen, only to be replaced when life shifted again. She opened the door. A small gust of cold air brushed her face, carrying the faint scent of rain. She stepped out onto the hallway carpet and closed the penthouse door softly behind her, as if sealing away something she couldn't let herself want. The elevator ride down felt endless. When she stepped onto the street, the city was still half asleep. A few early commuters passed by, collars turned up against the wind. Streetlights flickered. The sky paled to gray. She walked several blocks, her steps uneven. By the time she reached the bus stop, the cold had seeped through her sleeves and into her bones. She sat on the metal bench, the duffel at her feet, and stared at the empty street ahead. She didn't cry at first, but when she saw the bus approaching from the far end of the road, its headlights cutting through the soft morning fog, her chest crumpled inward. Her breath hitched, her hand covering her mouth as tears spilled over her cheeks, quiet, desperate, shaking. She bent forward, elbows on her knees, trying to hold herself together. Passers-by glanced but didn't stop. Boston was a city where people carried their storms privately. She wanted to go back. For a moment, just a moment, she wanted to run the whole way back to the penthouse, knock on his door, tell him she wasn't leaving because of him, but because of who she feared she might become. But the bus hissed to a stop in front of her, doors folding open with a weary groan. Elena wiped her face with her sleeve. She forced herself to stand, forced herself to step forward, forced herself to climb the first step, then the next. She took a seat near the back, turned toward the window, and watched the city blur as the bus pulled away. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, sad, determined in a way that hurt, and she wondered, her heart aching with uncertainty, had she made the right choice, or was she only repeating the same old pattern of escaping for the first time in years? Her mornings belonged only to her. Elena woke to the soft chatter of traffic drifting up from the street, the smell of coffee brewing somewhere down the hall of her friend Marissa's apartment, and the hum of a neighborhood already warm with life. Somerville felt different from Back Bay, less polished, more human. Old brick buildings lined the street. Bicycles rattled past before the sun fully climbed. Someone downstairs played the radio too loud, and the pipes clanged every time the shower was turned on. It wasn't luxury, but it was hers. She sat up slowly, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her duffel lay open at the foot of the bed, her few possessions folded neatly. No tension waited outside the door, no footsteps to brace against, no sharp voices reminding her she wasn't enough. She drew a breath, surprised at the quiet strength filling her chest. By mid-morning, she walked to the community center 3 blocks away. The building was old paint peeling in places, windows fogged, but the inside buzzed with energy. Children rushed down the halls. Volunteers carried boxes of art supplies. Someone laughed from the far end of the room, a warm, rolling sound. A staff member introduced her to the small piano tucked near the activity room, a simple instrument with a few sticky keys and scratches along the legs. Nothing like Daniel's grand piano, but the sight of it filled her with an unexpected mix of gratitude and longing. Her first student was a shy 7-year-old girl named Leah. The child perched on the bench as if the piano might bite. "Do you want to know a secret?" Elena asked gently, sitting beside her. Leah nodded, wide-eyed. "Every piano has a heart," she whispered, "and the heart lives right in the middle." She placed her fingers lightly on the keys, guiding Leah's small hand toward middle C. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, warming their knuckles as they pressed the note together. The soft tone echoed through the room, simple and bright. Leah giggled. "It sounds happy." "It does," Elena said, smiling. "And so do you." For the next hour, she taught the girl how to find notes by touch, how to keep her wrists soft, how to follow the rhythm of her own breath. When the lesson ended, Leah hugged her tightly. "I want to play like you," the child said. The words caught Elena off guard. She swallowed the sudden lump in her throat. "You'll play even better." As the day unfolded, she met more adults who had always wanted to learn but never had the chance. Teens who practiced in the bursts of nervous excitement. Older beginners whose fingers moved stiffly but with determination. Each one reminded her of something she thought she'd lost, the sense that she could give something to the world. In the evenings, she earned a little cash helping Marissa with errands, tutoring a neighbor's child, even baking for a local cafe on weekends. Nothing glamorous, but solid, honest. She was building a life, one small, careful brick at a time. Yet every night, when the house quieted and she lay beneath borrowed blankets, her thoughts drifted back to the penthouse high above Back Bay. She pictured the quiet kitchen, the warm light lingering in the living room, the sound of Daniel's footsteps as he moved through the space. She wondered if he had found her note, if he had been hurt, if he believed she had simply used him. She told herself not to think about it, not to reach out, not to reopen something that felt like a wound she had inflicted on herself. But the wondering stayed. Days passed, weeks unfolded, and miles away, in the penthouse she'd left behind, Daniel moved through his life with a precision that had become brittle. He left early for work, came home late, set his briefcase on the same corner of the counter every night. He ate standing up more often than not. He returned messages with clipped efficiency. His home grew quiet again, too quiet. He hadn't touched the piano since the afternoon he'd overheard her playing. But tonight, something in the stillness pushed him toward the corner of the room where it waited. The lamp beside the piano glowed softly, the golden light brushing the keys like an invitation he didn't trust. He stood there a long time. The city lay beneath him, shimmering through the glass. His reflection hovered faintly on the window older, more tired, lonelier than he ever admitted. Finally, he lifted the lid. His hand hovered above the keys. The faint tremble in his fingers surprised him. He pressed a single note low, warm, steady. The sound vibrated through the room, filling the silence with something fragile and honest. He closed his eyes. Another note, then another. Music, Something that had once been as natural as breathing rose cautiously from the instrument. Each measure carried the weight of years he hadn't allowed himself to feel. He played slowly, learning the shape of the keys again, letting the sound fill the hollow corners of the penthouse. And beneath the music, a thought flickered. She had brought this back to him. He didn't know whether to feel grateful or aching. Back in Somerville, Elena walked home from the community center, a small stack of sheet music tucked under her arm. The sky glowed faintly with the last traces of daylight. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk. Somewhere, someone played jazz on a porch speaker. She paused outside the apartment building, looking up at the windows glowing soft yellow. She felt proud of herself, stronger, but she also felt a loneliness she didn't dare name. Inside, she made tea, sat at the small kitchen table, and opened her notebook. She wrote down lesson plans, ideas for students, reminders for the week. But one thought pushed through the edges of every sentence. Was Daniel okay? Was he angry? Did he miss her? She closed the notebook abruptly. The sound echoed in the small kitchen. She wasn't ready to reach out. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She had left to protect herself. But protection and avoidance were cousins, and she feared she didn't yet know the difference. As she lifted her cup, her hand lingered in the warm glow of the kitchen light. Two people healing in parallel. But were they drifting closer, or quietly slipping out of each other's reach? The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Elena stood by the row of mailboxes outside Marissa's building, the cold metal still pressed against her fingertips as she stared at the elegant script on the front. Her name, Elena Foster, looped in deep blue ink. No return address, just weight, presence, intention. She carried it upstairs with slow, careful steps, as if a sudden move might scatter whatever hope or warning it held. Inside the apartment, she set it on the kitchen table, the afternoon light falling across the embossed seal, an intricate crest she didn't recognize, pressed into thick cream-colored paper. It looked like something from a life she'd never lived. Marissa walked in, dropping her keys in a small ceramic dish. "You're standing like that envelope just insulted you." "It might have," Elena murmured. She broke the seal with her thumb. A faint scent of expensive stationery rose from the fold-clean linen, something floral under it. She unfolded the card, and her breath caught. A formal invitation. The Lenox Hall Foundation invites you to an evening of music, supporting adults returning to the arts. Saturday 7 p.m. Lenox Hall, one of the city's most historic concert venues. Marble staircases, crystal chandeliers, the kind of place she used to dream about as a teenager, back when she and her mother played duets in their small living room, imagining futures they weren't sure they'd ever reach. But that wasn't what made her hands tremble. At the bottom of the invitation, written in the same deep blue ink as her name, was a single line. "Your presence matters." No signature. But she knew the handwriting. She had seen it on a note taped to a bowl of soup he once made for her. On a scrap of paper he'd left by the door when he'd stepped out for a call. On the thank you card he'd written to a neighbor she watched him help with groceries. Daniel. She set the card down, the air in the kitchen shifting around her as if someone had opened a window she didn't realize was locked. She pulled out a chair and sat, staring at the words again. Marissa leaned her hip against the counter. "Is it from him?" Elena hesitated. "It has to be." "Do you want to go?" "That's the problem," she whispered. "I don't know." Her chest tightened with the same mix of longing and fear that had haunted her since leaving the penthouse. She had built something steady these past weeks: routine, purpose, small victories that belonged only to her. She'd begun reclaiming parts of herself she thought Donna had crushed long ago. And yet, the thought of seeing him again made her pulse lift in her throat. "I don't want to be pulled back into something that hurts," she said quietly. "Did he hurt you?" "No," Elena said, shaking her head. "I hurt myself by running. But I still don't know if going back is strength or weakness." Marissa pulled out the chair across from her. "Let's pretend for a second it's not from him. Would you want to go to a concert like this? Elena traced the edge of the invitation with her fingertip. Yes. God. Yes. Just to sit in that hall. To hear music fill a space like that. She exhaled. But that's not the world I belong to. Marissa snorted. You teach half the neighborhood how to play piano. You play like someone who breathes through the keys. If that's not your world, whose world is it? Elena lowered her gaze. He's part of that world, and I don't know if seeing him again would heal something, or break it further. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Outside, a bus rumbled down the street, somewhere upstairs. A neighbor laughed too loud. Elena didn't move. She didn't touch the invitation again. She simply stared at it, as if the paper itself might speak the truth she couldn't reach. Marissa finally stood, walked around the table, and pressed the envelope back into Elena's hands. Her voice softened, losing all teasing. You're scared, she said. That means you should go. Elena swallowed hard. What if it's a mistake? Then at least it'll be your mistake, Marissa said gently. Not one made out of fear. Elena looked down at the card again. The words blurred slightly, and she blinked rapidly until they returned into focus. Your presence matters? It didn't promise anything, didn't ask anything. It was simply an opening a door left ajar. Elena folded the invitation, pressing the crease slowly, deliberately, as though sorting through her own hesitation with the same care. Part of her felt the faintest flicker of anticipation, something too fragile to name. But beneath it lay another truth, quieter and harder to face. She wanted closure, or hope, or some piece of both. She rose from the table and walked to her room, the envelope held loosely in her hand. She placed it on her dresser beside her small stack of sheet music. The afternoon sun dimmed, replaced by the warm glow of the bedside lamp she'd bought at a thrift store. She sat on the edge of the bed. The invitation caught the light gold against paper. She imagined Lenox Hall, the hushed voices, the polished floors, the first note of the night rising through the space like a prayer. She imagined Daniel standing somewhere in the crowd or waiting somewhere in that building. Her breath caught at the thought. Maybe he wouldn't be there at all. Maybe he had sent the invitation as a goodbye. Maybe it wasn't from him at all. But the line at the bottom, your presence matters. No one else would write that. In the quiet of the room, she rested her fingertips on the envelope, feeling the slight ridges of the embossed seal beneath the paper. She felt the weight of choice settling on her shoulders, not heavy like Donna's expectations, not suffocating like doubt, but real, human, hers. She drew a long breath in, and then, almost frightened by her own voice, she whispered into the empty room. What will I find if I go? The silence didn't answer, but it didn't push her away either. She didn't expect him to be standing backstage looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. The dim corridor behind Lenox Hall shimmered with warm amber lights, but Daniel's face held a pallor that came only from too many nights staring at ceilings. His suit hung slightly looser than before. New lines darkened the skin beneath his eyes. And yet, when he saw her, something alive flickered across his expression, as if he'd been holding his breath for far too long. Elena, he whispered, her name breaking in the middle. She swallowed hard. She had prepared for anything distance, cold courtesy, even anger, not this raw relief, not this man who looked stunned. She was actually standing there, dressed in a simple black dress and clutching her purse like it was the only thing anchoring her in place. You invited me, she managed. I prayed you'd come, he said softly. Behind him, the muffled hum of the audience seeped through the velvet curtains. Hundreds of voices, a soft tune from the orchestra warming up, the pulse of a night that didn't know two people backstage were holding the frayed ends of something breakable. Daniel gestured to a small dressing table. On it lay her mother's sheet music restored, flattened, placed inside a clean leather folder, the edges no longer curled or water-stained from years of neglect under Donna's roof. She stepped closer, breath catching when she saw the familiar loops of handwriting. I had a conservator work on them, Daniel said, his voice unsteady. They deserve better care. So did you. Elena touched the top page, her hand trembling. Why would you do this? He took a breath, gathering himself as if each word had to be fought for. Because your mother mattered. Because your music matters. Because He stopped, lowering his gaze to the floor. Because I needed to honor what you lost. Not replace it, not mend it, just honor it. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Daniel looked up again. The foundation tonight, it's for adults returning to the arts. People like you who had dreams paused by life, by loss, by circumstances that broke them in ways no one else sees. He paused. I named the scholarship fund after your mother, using her maiden name so your privacy stays intact. I wanted the name to carry her legacy without exposing yours. Elena's throat tightened, a knot forming so deep she doubted she could swallow past it. You did all that I had to. His voice cracked. Not to win you back, not to ask anything of you, but because I should have told you sooner that I never wanted to fix you. I never saw you as someone broken. I saw strength the minute you stood in the rain, refusing help you desperately needed. I saw a woman trying so hard to hold her dignity together that she forgot she deserved softness. 2. Her breath shuddered. The words hit something buried and sore inside her. Daniel stepped closer, but not too close, as if mindful of every inch of space she might need. I failed you by letting Lauren twist the truth before I could explain. I failed you by not stopping you when you walked out. I was afraid of being too much, of clinging when you needed air. But I should have fought harder for clarity, not for ownership. His voice softened. For partnership. She pressed her fingers to the restored sheets again, grounding herself in the familiar ink strokes. Why am I here? Daniel? His answer came barely above breath. Because I want you to play tonight. Elena's heart lurched. Daniel? Not for me, he added quickly. Not to prove anything, not even for an audience. For you. He gestured toward the stage where the orchestra's tuning had settled into a quiet chord. Something happens when you play. You come home to yourself. And I think you've been away from yourself for far too long. Her hands trembled more visibly now. She clasped them together. I haven't played on a real stage I know. I'm not ready. No one ever is. Elena closed her eyes. Images pressed against her Donna's cutting remarks. Nights practicing in silence so her stepmother wouldn't complain. The long bus ride under storm clouds. The penthouse piano she touched like a forbidden relic. All the stops and starts of a life interrupted. This feels too big, she whispered. Daniel swallowed. Then let me make it small. He stepped forward and held out the folder. Just one piece. Your mother's. The one you played the night you arrived. Nothing more. She hesitated, breath shaking. His hand didn't move. He simply waited, the folder resting against his palm. This isn't a rescue, Elena, he said gently. This is me stepping back and giving you space to take the next step if you want it. I'm not saving you. I'm cheering for you. She opened her eyes. His gaze held no pressure, no expectation, only sincerity that unsettled her because it left her nowhere to hide. I'm terrified, she admitted. I am, too. A faint, exhausted smile lifted one corner of his mouth. But maybe fear just means we're close to something true. She stared at the folder, at her mother's music, at a past she had run from, and a future she didn't yet know how to choose. Her fingers moved before her mind did. She took it. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second relief. Gratitude. Something deeper passing across his face, but when he opened them, he didn't step closer or reach for her. He simply nodded. I'll be in the front row, he said quietly. Elena held the folder against her chest. The warmth of the stage light seeped through the curtains as if reaching for her. She heard the host walk onto the stage, introducing the first half of the program. Applause followed like a distant tide. She drew a slow breath. And yet, even as certainty fluttered weakly inside her, one question still pressed against her ribs, painful and sharp. Would this performance heal the fragile thread between them, or pull it tight until it snapped? Her fingers shook as she touched the keys, but the first note steadied her heart. The hall around her blurred into soft shapes, the audience dissolving beneath the wash of stage light. For a moment, she wasn't 38, afraid, rebuilding her life by small, fragile steps. She was simply a daughter, sitting beside her mother's old upright piano in their Columbus living room, listening to laughter float from the kitchen, sunlight spilling across sheet music that smelled faintly of cedar and ink. She breathed in, and the memory faded, leaving only the keys beneath her hands and the thin rustle of the restored pages on the stand. She played the first phrase cautiously, as if her heart might crack with the wrong pressure. But the melody, quiet, hopeful, unfinished, was one she had known for most of her life. It guided her gently, like a hand at her back. Halfway through the second measure, her vision cleared enough to see him. Daniel sat in the front row, elbows on his knees, hands clasped as though holding himself together. When she looked at him, really looked, his eyes were already wet, not with the grief of a man falling apart, but with the aching relief of someone witnessing a moment he'd never thought he'd be allowed to see. She blinked and returned to the keys, letting the music soften. Some notes trembled, others slipped slightly off tempo, but the imperfection didn't matter. The room held its breath as if listening to something more than melody, something like truth spoken without words. When she reached the final chord, her hands hovered in the air a moment longer than they needed to, as if they weren't ready to let go of the warmth still vibrating beneath her fingertips. Then she lowered them into her lap, exhaling in a long, shaky release. The applause rose gently, not loud, not eager, simply respectful, a sound that held her and asked nothing more of her. She stood, feeling the faint wobble in her legs, and gave a small nod toward the audience before stepping away from the piano. Backstage waited dim and quiet, a refuge lit only by a few work lamps. She slipped behind the curtain, pulse still racing, palms still tingling. Daniel found her in the wings before she'd even taken a second breath. "Elena," he said, voice roughened as if scraped by emotion. "That was—" She shook her head quickly. "Don't try to make it bigger than it was. I'm not—" He stepped closer, keeping his warm certainty gentle. "I'm trying to tell you I haven't felt something like that in years." His words softened the air between them. She leaned against one of the tall wooden supports. Needing the grounding? I hadn't played that piece in so long. I didn't know if anything would come back. It wasn't the music that mattered. His gaze steadied on hers. It was you choosing to play it. She let out a small, tired laugh, rubbing her fingertips together. Choosing is new for me. Daniel's jaw shifted, the emotion in his eyes dimming into regret. "I know why you left," he said quietly. Her heart tightened. "Do you—" "Yes?" He slipped his hands into his pockets, a posture that seemed to brace him. "You didn't leave because you didn't trust me. You left because you didn't trust what it would mean to stay." Her throat constricted. "I wasn't ready to be someone's project again. Is that what you thought I wanted?" She lowered her gaze to the worn wooden floorboards beneath their feet. "I didn't know. Lauren's comments, the timing, I panicked. I heard what I feared most, not what was true." Daniel nodded slowly, grief flickering across his face. "And I let it happen. I didn't tell you how I felt until it was too late. I didn't fight for clarity when you deserved it." Silence stretched between them, filled with all the things both of them wished they had said earlier. Elena lifted her gaze. "When I left, I kept hearing that voice in my head, the old one. Donna telling me I couldn't survive without someone stronger to carry me, and I hated how quickly I believed it." "You didn't believe her?" Daniel said softly. "You believed the fear she planted." That truth landed deeply, steadying her breath. She stepped away from the support beam and faced him fully. "I don't want to repeat old patterns. I don't want to lean on someone until I disappear again. If we ever try anything at all, it has to be slow. It has to be real. I can't be rescued. Not by you. Not by anyone. For a moment, Daniel didn't speak. His expression wasn't wounded or defensive. It was something else, something like profound respect. "Elena," he said slowly, "I don't want to rescue you. I want to walk beside you. That's it. That's all I've ever wanted, even when I didn't know how to say it." Her breath faltered, not from fear this time, but from the startling gentleness of the offer. They stood at the edge of the stage together, the main light slowly dimming behind the curtains. A single spotlight faded, leaving their figures outlined in a warm afterglow, two silhouettes suspended between endings and beginnings. Elena reached for the leather folder, holding it against her chest. "Daniel, if we do this," she paused, searching for steadiness, "it has to be built on equality, not gratitude, not need, equality. Then we'll build it that way," he said. His voice was steady, but something fragile trembled beneath it, hope not yet spoken aloud. She studied him, the man who had given her space when she needed it, and truth when she feared it most. And even as something inside her eased open, she felt the cautious tremor of uncertainty. Could they build a life rooted in balance, not rescue and partnership, not dependence? Her heart didn't have an answer yet, and that uncertainty felt honest. Healing didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like breathing easier each day. Elena realized it one soft March morning when she stepped out of her Somerville apartment and noticed, almost with surprise, that her shoulders weren't tense. The winter air was still sharp, but not in a way that made her flinch. She exhaled, watching her breath drift upward in a pale cloud, and felt something inside her settle. Everything had become slower now, not stagnant, just steadier. 3 months had passed since the performance at Lenox Hall. She and Daniel had agreed to take things one step at a time, with more honesty than either of them had practiced in years. Their pace was unhurried, intentional. Some weeks they met twice, others only once, and in that rhythm, something safe began to grow. Most mornings, Elena taught at the community center. New students appeared through word of mouth, a retired nurse who always apologized for playing too softly, a 10-year-old obsessed with Beethoven's Moonlight, a young mother returning to music after years of putting herself last. Elena watched them find middle C, stumble through scales, press through fears she recognized in her own bones. Each small victory reminded her that starting over didn't require youth, only willingness. In the evenings, she sometimes visited Daniel's penthouse. It no longer felt intimidating. The rooms remained elegant, but no longer cold. The piano, once a silent monument to old grief, now lived in gentle use again. Daniel played with the hesitancy of someone rediscovering a language he thought he'd forgotten. Some nights he played only a few bars before stopping. Other nights he wandered through long, aching pieces, letting the notes echo across the tall windows overlooking Back Bay. And when she was there, they often sat side by side on the piano bench, their shoulders touching lightly just enough to remind each other that closeness could be calm. One evening, she arrived to find the living room filled with the mellow gold of a late spring sunset. Daniel sat on the piano bench, waiting. When he looked up and saw her, a warm, easy smile lit his face. Nothing desperate, nothing uncertain, just gladness. "You're early," he said. "I finished classes sooner than I expected. I'm glad you're here." He shifted slightly so she could join him on the bench. Their hands brushed accidental, natural, the kind of touch that came from comfort, not hesitation. "How was teaching today?" he asked. She laughed softly. "Messy, wonderful. A 7-year-old told me she practiced every day this week, and then proceeded to play with both thumbs on middle C." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Prodigy, absolutely." He started playing a simple pattern on the keys, something rhythmic and gentle. She watched his hands steady, relaxed. The change in him was unmistakable. He'd reduced his work hours, stopped taking meetings past 6, and began ignoring emails that felt urgent only to people who didn't know him well. She had asked him why, the first time she noticed. "Because I want a life," he had said, "not just a resume." Tonight. He finished the pattern and closed the piano lid halfway. "Elena," he began, voice soft but deliberate. "There's something I've been thinking about. For a while." Her heart fluttered wariness, not fear. "Okay." He stood and moved to the kitchen counter, where a small folder lay waiting. When he returned, he placed it gently in her hands. "Before you open it," he said, "I want to explain." She looked up at him, steadying herself. "You've changed that community center," he said. "They have more students than they know what to do with, and your classes fill up first. You see, people really see them, and you give them permission to try again. Do you realize what that means?" She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. "I know you're not ready for anything sudden," he continued. "I know independence matters to you. But I also see how much more you could do if you had a space of your own." Elena opened the folder slowly. Inside were architectural sketches, modest, warm, practical, a small arts center, 3 teaching rooms, 1 open studio, a tiny performance hall with 40 seats. Nothing extravagant, just possible. She swallowed hard. "Daniel." He lifted one hand. "I'm not buying you anything. I want to invest in you the way you've invested in every student who walks through those doors. I'll support the financial side, but every decision, every class, every teacher, every piece of furniture is yours, completely." The room felt very still. Outside the windows, the city moved in soft layers of evening color, but everything around her seemed to narrow, sharpen, slow. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was fear, not of him of herself, of wanting too much, of stepping into something that could collapse, of hearing Donna's old voice whispering that she had no right to dream. "You don't have to decide anything now," Daniel said, noticing her silence but not misreading it. "Just think about what it would mean to build something that belongs to you, something no one can take away." Elena ran her fingertips over the sketch of the small performance hall. 40 seats, enough to encourage a community, not enough to intimidate, the kind of space where beginnings were welcome. She closed the folder gently. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's yours if you want it," he said. Her breath trembled in her chest. An ache moved through her hope, fear, desire, possibility, all tangled into something fragile, something new, something hers. She didn't answer, not yet. She wasn't ready. But as she sat beside him again, their hands resting on the piano lid with the warm glow of sunset spilling across their fingers, she felt a question rising within her, a quiet, trembling invitation. She wasn't sure she could say aloud. Was she finally ready to accept a dream she once thought she didn't deserve? The ribbon across the doorway fluttered in the spring wind, as if her mother were touching it. Elena stood still for a moment, letting the soft movement settle her heartbeat. The storefront behind her, freshly painted, sunlit, impossibly hers, held the smell of new beginnings, sawdust, fresh varnish, warm April air drifting through propped open windows. A small crowd gathered along the sidewalk, murmuring with anticipation. Children clutched tiny keyboards. Their parents held coffee cups and cameras. Daniel stood a few steps back, hands in his coat pockets, watching her with a quiet pride that made her chest tighten. She lifted the scissors with hands steadier than she expected. "Welcome," she said, her voice carrying across the small group. "And thank you for letting this place become real." The ribbon snapped cleanly. The crowd applauded. Someone cheered. And Elena felt the vibration of something she had never known, a beginning held up entirely by her own choices. Inside, sunlight spilled across the polished floors, warming the small performance corner and the teaching rooms lined with shelves of beginner books. Children hurried in, pulling their parents toward the instruments. Elena stepped aside to let them fill the space, her throat tightening as she watched small fingers hover over keys with the same tentative hope she had once carried. A girl with freckles pressed a single key and laughed at the sound. Another boy adjusted the stand on his tiny keyboard with exaggerated seriousness. Their joy echoed off the freshly painted walls, filling the room with life. Elena blinked, the scene blurring briefly. She had imagined this place many times, but she had never believed she would stand inside it. Daniel approached from behind, stopping just close enough that she felt his presence before she saw him. "It suits you," he murmured. She turned and met his eyes. There was no grand gesture in them, no hidden meaning, just warmth, the kind that grew slowly and stayed. "It still doesn't feel real," she said. "It is real," he answered, "because you built it." A pang of disbelief tugged at her. "We built it," she corrected softly. His smile deepened. "Maybe, but the vision was yours." Before she could reply, one of her new teachers, a retired music therapist named Helen, called out, "Elena, dear, could you help this one find her hand position?" Elena excused herself and crossed the room. She knelt beside a little girl who stared uncertainly at her instrument. "Your hands are perfect just as they are," Elena said gently, guiding the child to rest her fingers where the keys rose slightly under the pads. "Start small, one note at a time." The girl tried again, this time with a shy smile. As Elena moved from station to station, showing a parent how to tune a keyboard, adjusting a music stand, answering questions, she felt herself softening into a rhythm she understood deeply. This was her world now, her space, a life built not from escape, but from intention. The mail slot rattled. Someone must have pushed through a stray envelope while the door was propped open. Elena picked it up from the floor without thinking until she saw the handwriting. "Donna?" Her stomach tightened, but only faintly. Not the sharp fear that once froze her breath. Just an old bruise she no longer let guide her steps. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She folded the envelope once, then set it on a high shelf behind her desk, where it would wait without importance. Across the room, Daniel met her eyes. He'd noticed the shift in her posture he always did, but he didn't walk toward her, didn't press, didn't ask. That respect alone steadied her more than words ever could. Later, as the opening celebration wound down, parents gathered their children, offering warm congratulations before stepping out into the mild spring air. The light inside the center softened, turning golden as afternoon settled into early evening. Elena leaned against the piano in the small performance corner and exhaled, letting the quiet wash over her. Daniel walked toward her, touching the piano lid lightly with the side of his hand. "How does it feel?" he asked. She looked around the room at the little footprints on the clean floor, the keyboard slightly crooked, the music sheets already wrinkled at the corners. "Like I belong," she said softly. "For the first time in I don't know how long." He nodded once, as if he'd suspected that would be her answer. She hesitated, the older fear rising in a thin thread. "Daniel?" He stepped closer, not crowding her, just present. "Yes. What if?" She swallowed. "What if I grow faster than this? Or slower? What if one day you outgrow me or I outgrow you?" A faint ache moved across his features. Not disappointment, not hurt, just understanding. He touched the edge of the piano bench, grounding himself before speaking. "Elena," he said softly, "you didn't become part of my world." She lifted her gaze, unsure of his meaning. "We built a new one," he finished, "together. No one's ahead, no one's behind." Her breath caught. The words slipped into her like light through old curtains, warm and unexpected. He moved to sit beside her on the bench. Outside, laughter from the last few children drifted through the open door. Inside, the room held a gentle quiet, the kind that made trust feel possible. Elena traced her fingertips along the polished wood of the piano, a small smile tugging at her lips. She had stepped into something she once believed she didn't deserve a place of her own, a life shaped by intention, a partnership built on steadiness instead of rescue. But even in this fullness, one question lingered, soft and unfinished. What came after this new beginning? Years later, the house was still quiet, but no longer empty. The morning light drifted through the tall windows, soft and unhurried, settling on the hardwood floors like a familiar guest. Elena stood in the doorway of the living room, barefoot, wrapped in a thin robe, watching dust motes dance in the pale golden air. She breathed in gently, letting the stillness touch her. It was the kind of quiet she had once feared. Now it felt like peace. Behind her, she heard Daniel moving in the kitchen, slow footsteps, the soft click of a cupboard, the low hum he made when he tried to remember where he'd left the coffee filters. She smiled. Some things never changed. The piano waited in the corner, no longer a monument of grief or guilt, but a companion with a warm patina from years of use. A small vase of spring flowers sat on its lid. On the wall above it hung framed drawings from her youngest students' lopsided keyboards, stick figure orchestras. One picture of Elena with a glitter crown that had made Daniel laugh for a full minute when he first saw it. She crossed the room, her feet cold against the wood, and opened the piano lid with a familiar lift of her fingers. The hinges no longer creaked. She had oiled them herself the previous winter. A gentle wind brushed along the window glass, carrying the scent of damp earth and early blossoms. Elena reached for the stack of her mother's sheet music on the nearby shelf. The leather folder had worn soft at the edges from years of handling. When she lifted the pages, the notes looked the same as ever, steady, looping, patient. She placed them on the stand. Daniel appeared in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs, his hair slightly disheveled from sleep. He leaned his shoulder against the frame and watched her with a smile that belonged to no one else. "You're up early." "So are you," she replied. "I thought I heard the piano calling you." She shook her head, laughing softly. "It doesn't call. Then maybe I just know your footsteps too well." He set one mug beside the piano and came up behind her, wrapping a warm hand gently around her forearm. She leaned back slightly, resting against the quiet strength of him. They didn't need many words in the mornings. The house itself carried their history now silent but present, like an old tree that had watched them grow. "How's the center doing?" he asked after a moment. She tilted her head thoughtfully. Full, loud, wonderful. The small art center had grown into something larger than she ever imagined. Classes filled quickly, new teachers joined her, community events spilled out into the street on warm nights. Sometimes parents hugged her with unexpected intensity, whispering thank you for giving us this space. Other times, she simply watched from the doorway as children played their first hesitant chords, their faces bright with discovery. "And you?" Daniel asked quietly. "How are you doing?" It was an old question between them, asked not out of worry, but out of a promise they made to know each other honestly. Elena laid her hand on the sheet music. "I'm happy," she said. "Not the dazzling kind, the steady kind." "That's the best kind," he murmured, kissing the side of her temple before stepping back. The afternoon sunlight, richer now, spilled across the walls. She could hear the soft, rhythmic tapping of the tree branches outside. Daniel settled onto the couch with his coffee and a morning paper, though he made no move to open it. He watched her instead, calm, content, as if witnessing something sacred. Elena sat at the bench, letting her hands hover above the keys. She hadn't played her mother's piece first thing in the morning for a long time, but today felt right. Something in the air felt like invitation. She pressed the first note. It rang clear and confident. No tremor, no hesitation, no stumble. Her fingers moved with a familiarity that felt like conversation between past and present, between fear and forgiveness, between the woman she had been and the woman she had become. The melody rose gently, warm and bright, filling the room with a softness that settled into the edges of everything. Daniel set his coffee aside, leaning forward, elbows on knees, captivated. But he didn't interrupt. He knew what this moment meant. As she played, Elena felt her mother beside her, not as a ghost, not as memory, but as a presence woven through every note she had carried with her all these years. The pain that once clung to the music had transformed into something else, something whole. When she finished, she let her hands fall into her lap. A long, peaceful silence followed. Daniel crossed the room and placed his hand over hers, his warmth grounding her. "You've never played it like that," he said softly. "I've never felt it like this," she replied. He nodded, his eyes gentle. "You came a long way. So did you." They stood in the quiet. the kind that wrapped around them like an embrace. The house no longer felt like an echo chamber of loss or longing. It felt lived in, cherished, steady. Light shimmered across the windows, touching every corner as if blessing it. Elena looked at the piano again, then at Daniel, then at the sunlit room that held so much of their shared life. A life neither of them had expected, let alone believed they could build. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "how many lives we've touched through all this, through the center, through everything we went through?" Daniel squeezed her hand. "More than we'll ever know." The answer felt right open, unfinished, hopeful, because healing wasn't an ending, it was a path. And their story quiet, imperfect, luminous was only one small light among many. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, letting the stillness rest with them. Outside, the world carried on, children laughing, buses rumbling, wind stirring the new leaves. Inside, the house glowed with the simple, enduring truth they had built together, a home with light in the windows. And beyond that light, countless journeys beginning. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, quietly, almost shyly, in the small places where we finally choose ourselves. This story carries a gentle truth that leaving isn't always about escape. Sometimes it's the first act of courage after years of shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. And when we step into a new life, even with shaking hands, we give ourselves permission to grow in ways we once thought were reserved for other people. There's another truth. Just as tender love doesn't rescue us, it meets us where we are, honors the wounds we've carried, and walks beside us while we learn to stand on our own feet again. The right connection doesn't ask us to be smaller, quieter, or easier. It waits, patiently, for the person we are becoming. And maybe that's the softest part of all. Real healing doesn't roar. It returns slowly, like light through a window we forgot to open. If your heart is tired, or you're rebuilding piece by piece, may you remember this: you're allowed to begin again. And you're allowed to find a life that feels like home. Thank you, truly, for spending your time with this story. Your presence here matters more than you know. Every listening heart adds something gentle to the world. If you feel this story carried a little light, a like, a share, or a subscribe is a simple way to help the light reach someone who might need it tonight. Wishing you warmth, rest, and a soft place to land wherever you are.